A nonviolent freedom fighter, war crimes apologist, or something in between, Aung San Suu Kyi's decades-long nonviolent struggle for democracy has made her a hero around the world. But once appointed to office, many say her leadership has been disappointing. So who is she really? This is the rise and fall of Myanmar's Aung San Suu Kyi. Born on June 19, 1945 in what was then known as Rangoon, Burma, Aung San Suu Kyi was destined to be defiant from the start. It was in her blood. Her father was none other than Aung San, the former military general who negotiated Burma's independence from the British in 1947. He became known as a national hero and the founder of modern-day Myanmar, which was then known as Burma. But in 1947, when Suu Kyi was just 2 years old, everything changed. Her father was assassinated by a rival politician. In the years following his murder, Suu Kyi's mother, Khin Kyi, became a politician herself. She was appointed the country's ambassador to India in 1960, a job that would bring the young Suu Kyi abroad and shape her worldview. She went to high school in New Delhi, finding herself studying in a country that has also gained independence from the British just 2 decades prior. And while she was in India, Suu Kyi's country was in chaos. In 1962, General Ne Win deposed the country's democratically elected leader, ushering in a new era of military rule in Burma. Suu Kyi looked at her country from afar, as the progress that her father made seemed to be unraveling. Upon graduating from high school in 1964, she went on to study with the global elite at Oxford University. She studied philosophy, politics, and economics there, but she walked away with more than a degree. Oxford was where she met Michael Eris, whom she would marry in 1972. They eventually settled in the United Kingdom, where they had 2 sons. During this time, Suu Kyi would continue to watch as her country was sinking even further into dictatorship. As she raised her kids, Suu Kyi dove into researching and writing a biography on her father. But in 1988, everything would change for Aung San Suu Kyi. Her mother suffered a serious stroke, so Suu Kyi returned to Burma to be her caregiver. Call it a coincidence or fate, but her return happened at one of the most pivotal moments in Burmese politics. Nationwide protests against one-party rule and the military dictatorship culminated in what would later become known as the 8888 uprising. The regime cracked down on these pro-democracy protesters violently. Some estimate that over 3,000 people were killed, even though authorities claim that number to be much lower, at 350 people. In search of a leader to get behind, the protesters looked to the then 43-year-old Suu Kyi to fill the shoes of her father as a fighter for Burmese democracy. And that's exactly what she did. On August 26, 1988, standing before a crowd of an estimated 500,000 people on the steps of the country's iconic Whoredom pagoda, Suu Kyi called for democracy in Burma. As the country continued to deal with civil unrest, the State Law and Order Restoration Committee was created, which was the new military government that would rule over Burma. After the government allowed for the creation of political parties, Suu Kyi launched the National League for Democracy Party, or the NLD. But Suu Kyi would soon discover that her fight for democracy would become a long and constant struggle with the military. After the passing of her mother, Suu Kyi persisted in her fight for democracy, even at great personal expense. Staying in Burma meant being separated from her family, who stayed behind in the United Kingdom. Undeterred, her bold demands for human rights, as well as her growing popularity among the people, made the soft-spoken Suu Kyi one of the biggest threats to Burma's military establishment. The military was so concerned with Suu Kyi that it even made her a political prisoner in 1989. She was placed under house arrest and barred from elected office in the country, which was officially renamed Myanmar. But Suu Kyi's impact on Burmese politics was already past the point of control. Despite her detention, Suu Kyi's NLD party won a landslide victory in the country's parliamentary elections in 1990. And the military was completely shocked by the results. It refused to recognize the NLD's victory and cracked down on the group. All the while, Suu Kyi remained dedicated to promoting nonviolent resistance to military rule, even as her supporters were being rounded up and placed in prison. Her stubborn dedication to nonviolence made her popular on the world stage, earning her the nickname, The Lady. After the European Parliament awarded her its Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought in 1990, Suu Kyi wrote that, quote, "It is not power that corrupts, but fear. Fear of losing power corrupts those who wield it." Those words would come to haunt her in the years later. The next year, she was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, which cemented her as a global figure. But she wasn't able to accept either award in person because of her continued house arrest that lasted for 6 years. She was released from house arrest on July 10, 1995, but the military would continue to restrict her activity and movement over the next 5 years, banning her from traveling outside of the capital city. She was faced with the difficult decision of choosing between her personal freedom and her fight for democracy, and she chose to fight. It would become increasingly clear to Suu Kyi that not only was her freedom at stake, but also her life. In November 1996, an NLD motorcade that Suu Kyi was in was attacked by nearly 200 men in Yangon, formerly known as Rangoon. And security forces did nothing to stop the attack as it unfolded. But she was undeterred by these risks.
It is surprising that they should ask us to make concessions when it is the military regime which has arrested our people and which is continuing to arrest our people illegally outside of the law, torturing them, imprisoning them, and subjecting their families to much harassment and oppression.
Once again, she would face the heartbreaking decision she had faced before, one between family and country. Her husband, Michael, was diagnosed with an aggressive form of prostate cancer back in the United Kingdom. In 1999, he requested the military government allow him into Myanmar to see Suu Kyi one last time. It rejected his request, but said it would allow Suu Kyi to travel to him instead. Suu Kyi was now faced with an unimaginable choice. To see her husband one last time, she would risk not being allowed back into her country. She chose to stay and fight, and on March 27, 1999, Michael died. Even in her time of grief, she continued to push against political oppression in Myanmar. And on September 15, 2000, she had had enough. In front of NLD supporters, she boldly declared that she would travel outside of Yangon, defying the military government. Later that month, as she prepared to board a train out of the city, security forces flooded the station to prevent her from leaving. And days later, she would once again find herself in a familiar situation. Suu Kyi was placed under house arrest again, but there was something different about this time. With Suu Kyi out of the public eye and less threatening to the government, they began secret negotiations over the country's future. 2 years later, on May 6, 2002, Suu Kyi emerged from the confines of her home and addressed hundreds of her supporters who had long awaited her return to public life. Government officials even said that Myanmar was entering a new era where citizens could freely participate in politics. Suu Kyi took advantage of this. She began touring the country to visit supporters, but she was often accompanied with government officials. Things were finally looking up for Suu Kyi, but one eventful day would undo all of the progress she had made. In 2003, another one of Suu Kyi's convoys was attacked by pro-government mobs, and this one was worse than the one before. At least 4 NLD bodyguards were killed. The government responded by arresting Suu Kyi. She was detained before being put under house arrest again. And this time would become the longest amount of time she would spend under house arrest. As the years passed, Suu Kyi patiently waited to continue her fight. But the government tried to delay this as long as it could. It extended her sentence not once or twice, but on 4 different occasions. It wasn't until 2010 that she would once again emerge from her house into the crowds of supporters who had long awaited her return. And she hit the ground running. She began working with the NLD to prepare for upcoming parliamentary elections in 2012. And they won, big. Over 2 decades since the 8888 uprising thrust her into the fight for democracy, she finally achieved her goal. Her party won the election in a landslide. They secured 43 of the open 45 seats in parliament. Suu Kyi was elected the leader of the opposition, but she wasn't finished yet. She set her sights on the country's 2015 election, which would be the first openly contested general election in Myanmar in over 25 years. Even though the military government was slowly letting go of some of the control, it had no plans of letting go of the sweeping powers given to it in the country's 2008 constitution. Despite having democratic elections, the military is entitled to 25% of seats in parliament. That makes it impossible to change the constitution without the military's approval, which requires over 75% of parliament to approve. Despite this political reality, Suu Kyi and her party still ran in the 2015 election.
Who said I'm going to be the Prime Minister? The Prime Minister is below the President. I've said I'm going to be above the President.
And again, they won big. The NLD, which had struggled for power for decades, had finally become the ruling party.
She's our mother.
It formed a government, and in 2016 created the position of State Councillor for Suu Kyi, making her the de facto leader of Myanmar's government. The position was created for Suu Kyi because she wasn't allowed to become president due to the constitutional restrictions on citizens with foreign-born spouses or children. But her leadership in Myanmar has revealed a side of the pro-democracy fighter that the world hadn't seen before. That she too was capable of falling into the same pattern of others in positions of power that she warned about in 1990. Since rising to power in Myanmar, Suu Kyi's reputation on the world stage has drastically changed. She continues to defend the country's violent actions in Rakhine State against the ethnic and religious minority group, the Rohingya people. In 2016, a group known as the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army attacked police outposts in Rakhine. Then reports began to emerge that Myanmar security forces were committing violence against the Rohingya people, which some said amounted to ethnic cleansing. The international community has looked to the Nobel Peace Prize winning Suu Kyi to defend human rights in her country, but she's repeatedly failed to do so as the de facto head of Myanmar's civilian government. In an exclusive interview with the BBC in April 2017, she denied that ethnic cleansing was taking place in Myanmar. She also pushed back against international criticism of her handling of the crisis.
Do you think that people in the West misjudged you or mischaracterized you or misunderstood you, expecting you to be this sort of amalgam of Mahatma Gandhi and Mother Teresa? And actually, maybe you're closer in your determination and steeliness to someone like Margaret Thatcher?
Well, no, I'm just a politician. I'm not quite like Margaret Thatcher, no. But on the other hand, I'm no Mother Teresa either. I've never said I was. Mahatma Gandhi actually was a very astute politician.
Since that interview, UN officials have called what's happening in Myanmar genocide, creating one of the world's worst humanitarian crises today, with over 700,000 Rohingya having fled the country for safety since 2017. Suu Kyi, once beloved around the world, now found herself fallen from grace on the world stage. Some even began calling for her Nobel Peace Prize to be revoked over her position on the Rohingya crisis. And in December 2017, she found herself once again at the center of international criticism. 2 Reuters journalists were arrested for their investigative reporting into the atrocities happening in Rakhine State. Suu Kyi, who could push for the reporters to be pardoned, has refused to do so.
They were not jailed because they were journalists. They were jailed because the court has, sentence has been passed on them because the court has decided that they had broken the Official Secrets Act. So if we believe in the rule of law, they have every right to appeal the judgment and to point out why the judgment is wrong if they consider it wrong.
As she holds on to power in Myanmar, Aung San Suu Kyi's story will continue to unfold. Only time will tell whether she'll go down in history as the non-violent freedom fighter she's been for decades, or just another power-hungry politician who's been complicit in war crimes. What do you think Suu Kyi should be remembered for? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching Now This World, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more every week.